A pleasure to meet all at last, and here we are at it again with some more of HGN Season 3 and a crossover series I made known as Bandtastic, where I get to talk all about rock and roll and the many examples of bands, both popular and not so popular, that have been involved in keeping the genre alive for ages to come. And I sure as heck am happy to talk a bit about a well-known example of old school rock and roll. Moreover, the likes of progressive, alternative, and even pop rock. All these basically came together into a well-known Canadian band known as Rush. Well known for the fact that Geddy Lee, the vocalist, Neil Peart, the iconic drummer of the band, and many other pieces of talent in mind. They all came together in the country known as Canada with lots and lots of things in mind. And these guys were not only a staple of the past 50 years of culture in the country known as Canada, but they've also given us way more than most other Canadian bands. Of course, you probably know that I've talked about such bands like Arcade Fire, for example, not to mention the more recent, wow, maybe not that recent, but I feel like that a much bigger example here stems out from the fact that if my phone doesn't already showcase good enough evidence to you, then well, I don't know exactly what will. But for the most part, what you can see here is basically what you get. A good collection of albums that I've managed to piece together, including their compilation album known as The Spirit of Radio, showcasing their best hits from 1974 to 1987. But after a near 50 years since they were first established, I'd say it's quite worthy to be able to talk about these guys here today. Because, well, for one thing, we've unfortunately lost one of their members, Neil Peart. He is practically regarded as one of the greatest rock and roll drummers of all time. One of the greatest in drumming history. Up there with other artists and band members like Phil Collins, for instance. But Peart definitely has his own iconic style that became a trademark value to making Rush a success way back in the day, and even now when they basically continue to perform, including a 2019 stream that went down where you could see everybody in action. But then of course there comes other albums, including their 1985 hit known as Power Windows, probably one of the biggest pieces of Canadian rock in the 1980s. But if I ever had to pick a favorite of all the albums they made, it would have to be Test for Echo, 1996. This one actually happened to showcase the best kind of modernization that they could have brought up. It may not have as much 80s feel to it as Power Windows did, but being that this was mid-90s as opposed to mid-80s, it really showcased a big difference in terms of only a decade's worth of musical innovation. But not to mention, there's lots of iconic rhythms, tempo ranges, and when you basically alternate back and forth between hearing the vocals of Geddy Lee himself and his somewhat distinctive, higher-pitched voice, it was kind of like a child or young teen behind a mic, confident that he is one day to become a successful man behind a guitar and a microphone. That's basically his kind of voice in general. And then, of course, as I mentioned, Neil Peart's impressive, specific, unique style of drumming, where it's probably one of the most complicated setups yet. It probably would take a huge load of expertise for a typical drummer out there to be able to come close to Peart's level of talent. But I'm sure that there's been a lot of time that Peart spent in his childhood getting those rhythms put together. Snares, basses, crashes, rides, and plenty of other unique bits that a drum kit would have. Throughout the time that Rush became a big success, practically overnight. And with all these different albums to work with, I'm sure this is just a good sign. Even though they lost a big member one of the most iconic drummers in history as of February 2020. It definitely hasn't really hindered their success in more recent years. Like I said, in 2019, they had themselves an iconic live stream, which was actually showcased at the Marcus Theaters. For whatever reason. But other than that, there's not much else left to say. I've definitely got some of my favorite songs picked out from them. Best albums that I could have gotten from them. Even more recent hits like Snakes and Arrows. Otherwise, there's not much else left to point out here. So, make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side if you'd like to see more.